you guys for coming out. Welcome to Science Cafe. Science Cafe was started in, I guess our first official one was spring in 2014. Sort of started as an initiative to give graduate students an opportunity to communicate broad science to sort of a broader community outside of our own little bubbles. So this is our last event for the semester, but we'll be back again in the fall. We typically do one per month. But today our topic is science in the movies. It's a little bit different than our previous Science Cafes if you've been to one before. So actually, since this is the last of the semester, we wanted to take some time to highlight everyone on the committee, as well as our sort of keynote speaker, Eric Yip, who I'll introduce in a little bit. So first, we're going to have a series of small presentations from each committee member. I'm going to preface this with saying that none of us are experts in what we actually talk about. To some extent we are, but we were really just interested in looking at sort of good examples of the use and especially misuse of science in the movies. So with that preface, we will get started.
I'll be talking to you about wetlands, soil, and time travel, and how the first two get a really, really bad rep in the movies. So wetlands are often misconstrued as these like creepy places where like witches or like the hunter lives. You know, in movies, like you're always going to be eaten by that alligator or some swampy monster. Or people often think that wetlands are a really great place to kill someone. And I would never understand that because they're actually the worst place. So wetlands, because they decompose things really slowly, this is a bogman that was found after hundreds of years in a wetland. So if you're ever going to kill someone, don't do it in a wetland. Choose some place dry like a pine forest or a desert, you know. It'll be there forever. So I study vertipools, and these are just two of my sites. And wetlands are really important. They offer a wide array of ecosystem services, and they do so just by simply existing. So they do it for free. I'm sure there have been many papers published, but one paper I read, the economic value of a wetland ranges from the millions to the billions. It depends, of course, on the size of the wetland, but they're really important. They provide a lot of services to us, and plants and animals that live inside of them. So, all right, there's soil. Looks like poop, but I guarantee you it's soil. So soil also gets a really bad rep in the movies. People often associate it to being dirty or, you know, clean or unclean. And people often associate soil to dirt. Pedologists, we don't really like that because soil is really important. It differs from dirt because it has undergone some sort of process. And I would like to show you this soil profile here. So talking and easing into time travel a bit. So I study ecosystem transitions and how a place can change over time. So in this soil profile, I often think of soil as kind of like a book that stores the history of the surrounding environment. And with each horizon as the soil is developing over time, it outlines the different chapters of that soil's development. So time travel gets a really good rep in movies, but you can use something as simple as soil. You don't need like a rocket or some sort of time traveling device to travel back in time. So this is what I do with my studies. I use soil specifically in wetland environments because they store a lot of things over long periods of time.
Hi, I'm Gail. I study stress in lizards, which has nothing to do with what I'm going to talk about today. One of the things I notice when I watch TV and movies is how fast science happens. Whether it's how quickly a DNA test comes back on CSI, or maybe it's how fast Tony Stark develops his newest AI. It's all super fast, which just doesn't sound very familiar to me. But today I'm going to talk a little bit about that with regard to miracle cures, or in other words, antidotes and antiviruses. So my first example isn't the movies, it's TV, but I'll come back to movies in a minute. But it's an example from the X-Files. So the X-Files, if you know, recently had a mini revival for 6 episodes. And without giving major spoilers away, don't worry, in the final episode they decide that The majority of the population is infected with some virus, and of course the main character is immune, they always are, and Scully here, the main character, wants to make an antidote or an antivirus from her blood. All right, so now I say antivirus, but really they just decide they need a cure from her DNA. They never really say it's an antivirus. They talk about a vaccine at some point, but if they're already infected, I'm not sure how effective a vaccine is, but semantics aside, she wants to make this antivirus, we'll say, from her blood. So she draws a bunch of her blood. A couple hours later, she has these IV bags of this cure that she can deliver to her friends. Of course, unsurprisingly, it's a much more lengthy process, right? Now, I'm speculating here, as I said, this is not something I do every day, but I imagine there's a matter of isolating and extracting any antibodies that are in the blood, the things that are actually going to do the work. Then you need enough to actually do something, so you might have to amplify them or collect more somehow. So that's a time-consuming process. Now, Scully was in a hospital when she was doing this, but it still strikes me as odd that they just magically had all the supplies, all the right reagents, everything you would ever need. Because I don't think this is something you usually make in a hospital. I would think maybe a hospital might get antiviruses from a different location. But okay, maybe they had supplies. All right, we'll gloss that one over. Another thing that's surprising is even though she is a practicing medical doctor, I don't think that's something she would be doing. Maybe a lab tech might do it, but I don't think the doctor who interfaces with you makes an antivirus on a day-to-day basis. And of course, she doesn't have any protocols. They never need instructions. She just knows what to do, right? So even when I do protocols and wet science that I do all the time, I still always have the instructions in front of me because you don't want to lose your blood samples and you want to do it right. In this case, it's a time-sensitive nature. You have to do it right the first time. Maybe you should have some instructions. And of course, once it's made, she doesn't do any testing. It's like, this is it or nothing else. There's never going to be side effects, right? Because, well, we'll hope not, because it has to work or it doesn't. Now, she didn't try to mass produce it in this episode, although they often do that in TV, but that's also a time-consuming process there. And of course, this all happened in a matter of hours because it's magic like that. That doesn't seem very realistic, but again, speedy science. So if you wanted a movie example, I was just thinking about Batman Begins. There's a neurotoxin involved in that. Batman creates this antivirus, gives it to his genius corporate friend Lucius Fox to mass produce in a matter of days. So there's your movie example. Now, I just want to compare this to something different. The movie I Am Legend with Will Smith. So in I Am Legend, the world is infected with this virus. It's a zombie movie, so it's a zombie-inducing virus, I guess. And again, main character is immune. He wants to make an antidote from his blood. Now, in this case, we actually see him struggling to make an antivirus. There's evidence of years of research, and it's very well documented. Here, there's many, many failures, and it's not until late in the movie that we actually see him make any progress on this. And he tests his antiviruses, his different strains, on animals to see if it works. So in spite of the fact that this is a zombie movie, this process is actually much more realistic from the timeline standpoint. And so while I'm talking about antidotes and antiviruses, I also wanted to point out that the movies and TV often seem to think that they're magic. They work wonders. And so just to kind of give an example of that, let's take the movie Outbreak. So Outbreak, 95, they're combating the fictional virus, or disease rather, of Motaba, which is based off of Ebola and other diseases that cause hemorrhagic fever. But they make it more extreme because it's the movies. You have to make things more extreme. So they describe the symptoms as liquefying your organs. There's an onset of a couple hours, and there's a 100% fatality rate. So one of the CDC doctors contracts this disease. She's given an antivirus, and a day later she looks great. I mean, she's a little tired, but she looks wonderful. But if I'm understanding this fictional disease right, she should have massive internal bleeding, organ damage, other permanent and long-term effects, right? So certainly things that couldn't be healed in a day. And also, if it's an antivirus, it means you're stopping the antivirus from creating more copies of itself. It's not necessarily removing the copies of the virus that are already there. So just by nature of being an antivirus, it might take a few days. And so these are just a couple examples of how entertainment takes some liberties with how antidotes and antivirus are made and distributed, and how they work, and also how they take liberties with the speed of science.
Hey everyone, I'm Stacey Ambergy. I know most of you, but I am a second year PhD student in the ecology program working with David Miller, and most of my research sort of concerns figuring out where species can and can't occur and what sort of factors limit them or allow them to be present. So I'm really concerned with species distributions at large scales, and what I do that on frequently are amphibians and reptiles. So people who work on amphibians and reptiles are called herpetologists. The Latin root of herpetology comes from the word herpetos, which actually means creepy, crawly, slimy. So I think if you're talking about misconceptions in the movies, amphibians and reptiles have a really hard time intrinsically. I heard Shauna earlier, she said there were some sort of marsh monsters that were going to eat people, and I guarantee you everyone sort of thought of like the movie Anaconda, where something was going to come out, it was going to be scaly, it was going to be slimy, it was going to drag somebody under the water. Right? So I think that this particular group or groups of taxa have a pretty hard time when it comes to the movies, but I would argue that they're actually really quite beautiful. I think people have a tendency to think that snakes especially are kind of evil. They have this sort of insatiable bloodlust that they have to go, and they're going to eat you if you go outside. But anybody who's ever worked on amphibians and reptiles, or really just gone outside and hiked around, knows that they're actually pretty hard to find. A lot of what we do, we actually have to correct for the fact that they are trying to avoid you much more than you're trying to avoid them. And so they mostly like to be just left alone, which is a pretty big misconception if you're thinking of like Toad's Attack is a B-rated movie, Anaconda, Lake Placid, a wide variety of fairly awesome movies that are always great fun to watch, but it always makes you feel a little bad because they get a pretty bad rap when they're doing that. So it's reliable that I'll go and do outreach with kids, and then I ask them, what do you think of when you think of amphibians? And then immediately everyone's like, ew, it's slimy, ew, I want to hit it with a stick. I don't know why I want to hit it with a stick so badly. But I would argue, if you look at these species, this is just a subsection of some of the ones that I work on in Southern California. There is a wide variety of really beautiful patterns, beautiful morphology, fairly docile. I mean, this is not going to drag you into a wetland and eat you by any means. Too small, if nothing else. It might really aspire to that, but. So one of the biggest misconceptions that I would say is in the movies is that these guys are not monsters. And we also have sort of this negative connotation that you would then change them, right? There is the frog prince, and he's disgusting, and he has to convince the princess to kiss him and turn him into the magical prince that everybody's obviously waiting for. And this is what I would argue is not the case, is that most amphibians and reptiles are quite important and perfect the way they are. They're very important ecologically. If you don't like mosquitoes, if you don't like getting bit by ticks, then you love these guys because they're really good about controlling these populations of pests that we'd say. They're really important for cycling nutrients in forests and also between the aquatic and terrestrial habitats. So my big take-home message is that they don't need your pity, they don't need you to feel gross or disgusted by them because they're actually really integral members of the environment. And it would be nice to maybe see, well, I mean, I guess the Frog Princess one, they did that where they were kind of like, green is good. So that is my take-home message about amphibians and reptiles.
Hey everybody, my name is Andy and I study corals here at Penn State, which is kind of weird because we are completely landlocked. But how we do that is we just fly on wherever we need to go. So the corals I study are in the Caribbean or in Taiwan. But I'm going to talk a little bit about Finding Nemo today. Who has seen Finding Nemo? Okay, good, so I don't need to run through the story then. So basically, at some point in the movie, you see Marlin and Dory riding the EAC, or the East Australian Current, which looks like, spacebar, does that work? Yep, looks like this. So it's kind of like this underwater highway or tubes thing that they can just hop on and hop off wherever they want to go, and everything's great. But in real life, it actually looks more like, well, it doesn't look like this, but it's huge. It's actually 100 kilometers or 62 miles across, and 1.5 kilometers or about a mile deep. So it's more like this giant ribbon than a tube that you can jump on and off. And it does travel from the Great Barrier Reef up there down to Sydney, so it would be very convenient to use that in your story. However, reef animals don't tend to hop on and off currents when they're adults. They have a special life history stage called a larval stage that looks like this. So there's a clownfish up there. That's a coral, so I work on corals. So we have to throw a coral in there to connect this to my research. And a crab, a starfish, and a mantis shrimp. And as you can see, that these all look very different from their adult stages. And there's a few adaptations that allowed them to do okay in the larval stage, including being very tiny. So these are only about a few millimeters large. And a lot of them have see-through bodies, so they're harder to find. But still, there's a really low chance of survival in this stage. And that's about all I have. If you have any questions, I'd be happy to take those.
My name's Courtney. I am a first-year PhD student in the ecology program. Okay, so I'll just keep talking. So my research is focused a lot on sort of developing quantitative methods for thinking about how species will respond to environmental change. So today I was going to talk about sort of misconceptions of wildlife in general in the movies and also in documentaries. And so I have a couple videos. All of my fun jokes and everything were on that slide, but that's fine. So often people will use species that aren't necessarily present in a given location in their movies just to either sort of create a certain feeling like eeriness or because they think that sounds cooler than what is naturally occurring there. So I have a couple of examples. I know there are birders out in the audience and I apologize, but this is often used. So this sort of call is often used actually with sort of a lake in the background. You can imagine maybe wolves howling in the background. So what do you guys think this actually is? It's a loon, exactly. It's a common loon. If you don't know what that looks like, I'm sorry, I had a picture, but not entirely sure what's going on. Hopefully the librarian who's in charge of this room. Another sort of common I guess, mishap or mistake that people often assume is you have this really great, majestic bald eagle, right? And it's calling. Sounds something like this. So with that call in the background, what do you guys think that actually is? It's not a bald eagle, but
Red-tailed hawk.
it is a red-tailed hawk, exactly. So I have this really great slide of a bald eagle, and it says, you know, majestic in appearance, but not so majestic in voice. And so in real life, how many people actually know what a bald eagle sounds like? Yeah. So if you aren't familiar, doesn't it just say America? You guys can hear that in the back. Yes. I think it's actually quite pathetic.
Mighty American symbol.
Yeah. And so then I was going to talk about documentaries. So not only are sounds often misrepresented, but the footage that is collected in the wild is often also misrepresented. So a classic example, a lot of the BBC documentaries like Frozen Planet, there are, countless other examples. But sort of the way it's set up, right, they have these cameramen that are out in these really cold temperatures. Hey, we're getting back to business. Cameramen that are, facing these really adverse conditions and going through all this hard work to get these awesome shots that you wouldn't normally be able to see. To see this joke, right? I won't play the sounds again. This is what a loon looks like if you're not familiar. I apologize for this. This is bald eagle looking very skeptical. This is a fun event.
Get started.
Alright, so that's my little punchline. And then we get talking about these documentaries. So in 2014, I believe, there's sort of this scandal, I guess if you want to call it. A BBC cameraman actually came out and said, well, a lot of the shots that we get are actually staged. And so going back to that Frozen Planet example, you can actually see them here. They released a bunch of these photos where they're actually creating an artificial den. That's also artificial snow. Where they took a captive polar bear. I am not. And these are also captive cubs that weren't even actually with this polar bear. They had them in a little plastic Tupperware container so they could get a nice close-up look in them. But they paired it really nicely, and of course they had David Attenborough narrating over the top, so you're automatically sort of convinced that what you see is the truth, right? They actually paired it with footage of wild polar bears that were actually shot in pretty mild conditions. So, you feel bad for these cameramen that are out there in these really terrible, awful conditions, getting these really amazing shots, but really it's all staged in the warmth and comfort of a zoo most of the time.
I'm Chris. I study fungi, and I'm also a professional bum. So I like to hang out in these kinds of areas. How many of you are looking forward to the end of the semester, perhaps hanging out in one of these areas come the summer? Maybe, yeah. Our coral biologist. How many of you have been to the beach before? A beach. When you go to the beach, how do you feel? Do you feel pretty relaxed?
Depends on what I'm doing.
Depends on what. Okay, yeah, fair enough. Are any of you afraid of anything at the beach? In Australia, yes. Okay. How about just in general? How about getting in the water? Is anyone afraid of getting in the water? Okay, we've won. Well, there are actually it's not uncommon. There are a lot of people who are afraid of getting in the water at the beach, and there's a lot of reason behind that. And one of the most common is our lovely portrayal of sharks in Hollywood and in the media. And when you think back about where much of this fear-mongering first started, you can usually trace it back to Jaws and the da-da-da-da-da-da-da that comes with that. But I want to kind of show you today how the scenario is a little bit different in real life. And so one of the major media outlets I'm going to focus my attention on right now is the Discovery Channel and Shark Week, which I have a love-hate relationship with. Mainly because Shark Week offers a wonderful opportunity to stand on a platform of conservation for marine science, ocean science, marine biology for an entire week where you have the public's full attention and talk about problems that our ocean ecosystems, specifically sharks, face. And while Discovery has gotten better at this over the years, they also have a tendency to mislead. And maybe some of you are familiar with the Megalodon documentary, also dubbed a mockumentary, where they show maybe a 3.5-4 second subtitle at the beginning saying none of this is real, and then the rest of it seems like it's completely real. And people actually believe that. I was a marine bio concentration at my undergraduate institution, and I had people talking to me on campus saying, did you know Megalodon was real? Did you know mermaids were real? And none of that is the case. But that's because Discovery has built itself up with this reputation of basically giving up factual information, but one thing that you have to remember with TV and organizations like Discovery is that they're also in the entertainment industry, and this is something that their CEOs have stated over and over and over again, that they have to sometimes draw a fuzzy line between fact and entertainment. So one of the realities of sharks today is that many of the major shark populations that we think about are that a lot of people think about are in decline and have been for quite some time. And this is just a kind of a graphical representation of what some major shark species populations look like since between the 1970s and the 2000s. And you see 79% declines in great white populations, 97% in scalloped hammerheads, 99% in dusky sharks. And so why might that be the case? And a lot of it has to do with overfishing in a lot of cases, but there's also some other major causes, such as shark finning, where essentially you catch a shark and you cut off its fins and you throw it back in the water to drown. Over 70 million sharks are killed this way a year simply for something called shark fin soup, which is a commodity in China. It also leads to problems like this, where Australia put $20 million into a shark cull program to protect beachgoers, essentially, where they caught over 170 sharks. They didn't kill all those sharks. They killed 50 sharks. They targeted sharks at 10 meters and above and killed them all, essentially to remove large shark predators from coastal areas away from swimmers, which is essentially goes against the science behind sharks. And the fact of the matter is, sharks aren't there to eat you. They aren't there to attack you. Sharks play a major role in our ecosystems, and it's the fear mongering that you see in outlets like Shark Week and Jaws and and even in the media. You don't hear about sharks unless there's a shark attack, essentially, that lead to problems like this. And so I just want to leave you with this picture, which is not mine, of the deadliest animal on Earth next to a great white shark.
So thank you guys. Again, this was just sort of a way to highlight our Science Cafe committee members who have put in tons of work over the semester to sort of get this program up and running. So thank you guys again. And now, for the highlight of the evening, I'd like to introduce our keynote, Eric. Yep. So Eric is a postdoctoral scholar at PSU, where he studies the chemical ecology of gallflies and their interactions with their goldenrod host plants. And despite his current research on plant-insect interactions, he's actually studied spider behavior for over a decade, which is pretty impressive, with a focus specifically on social and sexual behaviors. And so he's going to talk a bit today about his work there. So, welcome, Eric.
Thank you so much for inviting me to the Science Cafe and for choosing what I think is a really fun and interesting topic. So when I first started preparing for this presentation, I went over to the Internet Movie Database website and I just did a simple search. And I found there were over 200 titles that contained the word spider, and over 600 titles that had spider as the key word. And to me, this really showed that spiders are really deeply ingrained in the human psyche. And you can also kind of see how humans have a relationship with spiders based on the kinds of spiders. So there are some nice spiders. We all know Charlotte from Charlotte's Web, or maybe Miss Spider from James and the Giant Peach. But for every nice spider, there were dozens of big spiders that were out to kill you and everyone you care about. I like some of the titles like Ice Spiders. I don't know why you combine those two things. Why not? And I like Big Ass Spider. I'm amused by thinking about where the hyphen goes in that title. Now, there's a lot of reasons why I can tell you why these movies are they're total fantasy. You don't need to be afraid of spiders, and in fact, you should appreciate them because of their biology and the ecological roles that they play in nature. But this is not that talk. Instead, I'm going to take a little bit of a different tack and explain why some of these movies actually get things right. And if spiders grew to the size of skyscrapers, or even just the size of of a medium-sized dog, they would be absolutely terrifying. And I say that because, aside from humans, spiders are the world's dominant land predators. They are a single order of animals, and they are very diverse. There's over 45,000 species. By comparison, there are only about 5,000 species of mammals. They live on every continent except for Antarctica, and they can be very abundant. You can have over 130 spiders in just a single square meter of land, and every single one of them is a predator. So it has to kill and consume other animals to survive, and so they are very good at killing things. Estimates vary, but research indicates that spiders consume anywhere from 100 to 47,500 kilograms of insects per hectare per year. 1 kilogram is about 60,000 houseflies. So we're talking about millions to billions of insects consumed by spiders every year in just a single hectare. So how are these spiders such great killing machines? Well, one thing that the movies get right is that spiders have super senses. So you're probably familiar with Spider-Man. You may have heard Spider-Man say that his spidey senses are tingling, and you may have wondered what part of Spider-Man was actually tingling. so I'm going to tell you, I'm actually going to tell you the secret. It's Trichobothria. And if you learn one new word, I hope it's this. These are small hairs on the legs of spiders. They stick straight out and they sit in these little cups. And they vibrate in responses to really minute air currents, which allows them to sense their prey even up to 20 centimeters away if the spider is totally blind. So they paint over the eyes of the spiders, and here's a series of still photographs where a blind spider is leaping into the air to try to capture this fly that's tethered on a string. So spiders also have silk. This is a feature, abdominal silk gland, that unites all the spiders into a single group. And they use it throughout their lives. They use it in reproduction, they use it in transportation, they use it to make a home, and many species use it to capture their prey, as you can see from Frodo Baggins, who is captured in the silk of a giant spider. And they can be really ingenious in how they use silk. This is an ogre-faced spider, which spins a web in its front 4 legs. It hangs upside down, and then when something comes underneath it, it reaches out and grabs it, almost like a fisherman taking a net and scooping a fish out of some water. And silk has to have some pretty amazing properties to do what it needs to do. Insects have a lot of kinetic energy when they hit a web. The silk needs to be able to do something with that energy without catapulting the insect back out of the web or having the insect break through the web and not be captured. And so spiders have evolved silk that is one of the strongest natural fibers known to man. It is in fact stronger than steel and tougher than Kevlar. This is a bit of a funky graph. On the y-axis is the tensile strength, which is the force applied to a unit area or the thickness of the thread. And then on the x-axis is the strain or extensibility. So Kevlar is in fact stronger than spider silk. Some people get that wrong. It takes a lot more force to break a thread of Kevlar than it does a thread of spider silk. But because spider silk is stretchy, you actually have to put more energy, which is here defined as toughness, into that thread to break it than it does to break a thread of Kevlar. And steel isn't actually on this graph, but it would be both weaker in terms of tensile strength and toughness than silk. And if that wasn't enough, spiders can make it sticky. They can add droplets of glue along the length of the thread. In addition, spiders are renowned for having venom, and once again, I'll have my friend Frodo Baggins demonstrate how that works. Oh, that doesn't look so good, does it? Thank you, Frodo. Now, J.R.R. Tolkien was an expert on Beowulf and Finnish and all sorts of things, but he wasn't an expert on spider biology. And of course, spiders don't have abdominal stingers. Instead, the venom is in the fangs, or chelicerae. It's delivered through a hollow tube in the fang. And they have musculature which allows them to control the amount of venom that they inject. Virtually all spiders have venom of one sort or another. There's one family that's lost its venom glands. But the vast majority of spider venom has little to no effect on humans. The only species you have to be concerned about in the United States are the widow spiders, the genus Flatrodectus, and the brown recluse spiders and relatives in the southern part of the United States. And even then, deaths from these spiders are just incredibly rare. But having said that, the components of the venom can be very potent. If you look at the LD50 on mice, which is the amount of venom required to kill half the mice you injected into, the venom of a black widow spider can be 200 times as potent as the venom of a rattlesnake, which is something you might want to keep in mind next time you watch Raiders of the Lost Ark. And you can just see how happy he is. That, he's only surrounded by snakes. It's not so bad. Another thing that the movies get right is that they often depict spiders as female. There's lots of spider women in various movies, as you can see from the Sherlock Holmes movie. Again, we have Charlotte. The name Shelob is just a combination of she, meaning she, and lob, which is an Old English word for spider. And just a quick note on spider anatomy. Both male and female spiders have a genital opening partway down the abdomen, but males don't have a penis. Instead, what they have is a modified palp, which is essentially an arm, where the last segment is modified into something like a hypodermic needle, so that the spider will deposit a droplet of sperm on some silk and then suck it up into the palp, and then uses that to deliver it to the female. And it's really females that run the show. In this study, they looked at spider size, like the male size over female size, and if they were the same, you'd expect the dots to be around 1, but instead, the average male spider is a little bit less than 80% of the size of a female, and in some cases there can be a really extreme size difference. So for example, in crab spiders, here we have a male that's hugging his enormous consort, and you can kind of see how he's got those specialized palps for mating, a little bit like boxing gloves. The same is true for some of the cobweb weavers, particularly the widows. And also, some of the orb weavers can have really big differences between males and females. And this has consequences for the males, if I can get this up. So here we have, this is Certophorus atricola, which is an orb weaving spider. The little guy is the male, he's courting the female. He's taking his third leg, she's strumming the silk, the female's responding. She's approaching him, she's also strumming the silk with her third legs. Things are going well, it looks like he's going to go, and he goes in, so he inserts those palps into her genital opening, and now she's biting him, things aren't going so well anymore. But he's still attached, so things are going okay. And then in a little bit, oh, there he is, he's detached. And then she starts to wrap him with silk, and then she eats him. Which is kind of romantic because it's monogamy, right? I mean, he's not going to mate with any other females. It's enforced monogamy, but still it's monogamy. And this has consequences for the males. We thought, well, since over 80% of males in this species are cannibalized after one copulation, they might really want to make that one shot count. So we looked at it, and we found that the males are more likely to mate with fatter females. So the bars with the HF, that means high diet females, males were more likely to mate with them than they were with the LF, the low diet females, who were thinner. Another thing you might have seen in the movies are groups of spiders either living together or spiders attacking en masse. And you may have thought, well, this is just Hollywood fantasy. Spiders are cannibals, as we've just seen, and they are mostly just found by themselves. And that's true, but there are some species that have evolved group living. And in fact, you can kind of see a little bit of a resemblance between the spiders here in the Hobbit movie and Anolosoma studiosus, which is a social spider that you can find in the United States. The most common form of parental care common form of sociality is parental care, where you have offspring living with one parent. And this is a still from Harry Potter and the Chamber of Secrets, when Aragog, the spider, has just told his children that they should go ahead and try to kill and eat Ron and Harry. One thing that J.K. Rowling got wrong, though, is that Aragog is a male spider, and you can see that he's got that nice enlarged palps, and he's a male. And interestingly enough, there are no paternal spiders. All care done by spiders is performed by the female, and they can take a variety of forms and be quite extreme. Females might just capture prey and then allow their offspring to eat the prey that they've taken. They have evolved regurgitation in some species, where they produce a nutritive fluid from their mouths. Some females lay unfertilized eggs that their offspring can eat, and some females have an obligate and very precisely timed macrophagy, where the female always just allows her offspring to swarm her, kill her, and consume her. So that's pretty devoted. In addition to these simple societies where just single families, you also have multiple adult groups that cooperatively breed and cooperatively capture prey. And this is why in the beginning of this talk I said, well, you maybe only have a spider like that big, it would still be pretty terrifying, which is true if you encounter hundreds or thousands of them. And these colonies can contain that many spiders. It's pretty impressive when you see a spider that's maybe less than a centimeter long take down a 10-centimeter long stick insect in a matter of seconds just by swarming it. And it turns out that cooperative prey capture is actually really critical to the evolution and maintenance of these spider societies. Because spiders face a problem. As the colony grows larger, they add silk to the web. But these webs are three-dimensional, and so that means that as it grows, the surface area of the web per volume decreases. And it's the surface area that the insects are contacting. And so what we found is as the colony grows bigger, the number of insects per capita decreases, which what we see in the top part of that figure. And that's bad. These are predators. They need food. Otherwise, they're going to die or start eating each other. But we also found that because of cooperative prey capture, as the colony gets bigger, they're able to capture larger prey. And when you combine those two things, the per capita prey capture per spider in terms of mass actually peaks at intermediate colony sizes and allows these societies to remain stable. So just a few things to keep in mind in case you're attacked by a giant spider on your way home tonight. Try not to move, or at least move very slowly. Spiders can sense your movement. Have a really good pair of scissors handy. Silk is strong, be able to cut it. If you have some antivenom, there are some available for some species. Good to have that. Don't be a male spider. Try not to look like a male spider, or you might find yourself in the jaws of a lusty female. Don't be William Shatner and avoid spider colonies. And with that, I'd like to take any questions. I also would like to introduce you. I have a colony of Delana canceraides, which is the social spider that was used in the movie Arachnophobia. Let me start going again. Let's see. Here we go. And then there's also the spider that jumped on Jeff Daniels' face, which is also fun. So, thank you.
Spider signal to its young that it's okay to eat her.
So it's a combination of both communication between the male and the female, and also internal, just probably hormonal cues, although no one's actually worked it out. But the female will vibrate the web, and then the juveniles will swarm on top of her after a certain period of time. And if you do these substitution experiments where you sort of change when the spiderlings have access to the female, so you have spiderlings, you take them away, and you give them to an older female or a younger female, they still will do it, but fewer of them will swarm, and they'll eat less of the female. So it doesn't work as well unless it has this nice coordination going on. And it does seem to be partially vibration and partially just internal cues of the individuals. Yeah.
I'm wondering what the biggest spider is, or maybe like historically were there really big spiders?
There's not a huge number of spider fossils. They don't fossilize very well. The biggest spider today is the Goliath bird-eating spider, which is this big with legs. I mean, body is probably more like this big. I don't know if there were any giant spiders. I'd have to look that up. That's a good question, because there were a lot of other giant things. Anybody like to see some actual social spiders in flesh?